On a fateful morning, February 24, 2022, the world held its breath. Russian forces surged across the Ukrainian border, their commander-in-chief, President Vladimir Putin, confidently asserting that victory was mere days away. He envisioned a lightning strike would obliterate the Ukrainian government, a swift conquest leading to flags of Russia billowing over Kiev before NATO could even blink. It was a classic strategy, bold, decisive, read from the pages of military history. But in a plot twist that would shock the world, 3.5 years later, it was not Putin who triumphed, but Ukraine, dismantling what was touted as the second most formidable military on the globe, and leaving Russia to grapple with the consequences of its grave miscalculation. To understand how this dramatic shift unfolded, we must rewind to the chaotic dawn of the conflict. Putin's strategy, a rehearsed script from Russian military doctrine, inadvertently unveiled Ukraine's intimate knowledge of his tactics, knowledge steeped in their shared Soviet past. On that critical first day, instead of succumbing to the onslaught, Ukrainian commanders orchestrated a counterstrike that rattled Russia to its core. Take the Battle of Hostomel Airport, which should have heralded Russia's victory. With 200 to 300 Russian troops loaded on 34 helicopters, they aimed to seize the airport just moments away from the capital, Kiev. This audacious maneuver was meant to establish an air corridor, directing forces straight into the heart of Ukraine. It echoed successful historical invasions, from Czechoslovakia to Crimea. However, the moment those helicopters descended, they were met not with an unguarded airstrip but a premeditated trap strewn with derelict vehicles and man-portable air defense systems. Ukraine's extensive radar network, a relic from its Soviet days, had been fortified through NATO collaboration, setting a deadly ambush. As the helicopters entered the kill zone, Ukrainian defenders sprung into action. Though the Russians eventually seized the airport, it was a hollow victory. Airstrips lay devastated, the promised air support evaporated, and Putin's anticipated three-day war morphed into a relentless siege of Kiev, culminating in a staggering defeat just weeks later. This mastery of defense and response would become a hallmark of Ukraine's strategy, echoing through the subsequent twists of the war. By September 2022, history would repeat itself in an even more audacious manner. The Russians had fortified their hold on the strategic city of Izium, using it as a base for approximately 18,000 troops. But what seemed a tactical advantage was, unbeknownst to the Kremlin, the stage for Ukraine's next daring maneuver. Ukrainian General Alexander Syrsky was crafting a deceptive play. As confusion spread in both Ukrainian and Russian media about a looming counteroffensive in the southern region of Kherson, on August 29, 2022, Ukraine announced the long-hyped operation. The Russians scrambled, transferring key units south, unwittingly leaving Izium vulnerable. On September 6, in a sensational reveal, Ukrainian forces launched their real offensive in Kharkiv Oblast, catching Russia completely off guard. The speed was overwhelming. An average of 4.6 miles each day marked the most rapid advance seen in warfare in a century. In just 6 days, over 1,150 square miles of territory were reclaimed, alongside the liberation of critical cities like Izium and Kupiansk. Russian units panicked, discarding weapons and equipment, vanishing from the battlefield, a haunting reminder of their declining prowess. As celebrations echoed through Moscow, oblivious to the unfolding catastrophe, Ukraine's strategic brilliance was cemented, setting the stage for audacious moves in the years to follow. Would they continue to outmaneuver their oppressor? Would Russia ever regain footing? These questions lingered as the conflict unfolded in unexpected and dramatic fashion. This relentless grip of warfare continued to evolve, with Ukraine proving that they could strike deep into Russian territory itself. The audacity of their maneuvers shattered the misconceptions of Russian invulnerability and recalibrated the international support that flowed toward Ukraine. No longer would they be merely defending, they would now remind the world that the battle was far from over. The tides had turned, leading to a groundbreaking transformation in drone warfare and domestic military production. With a staggering increase from 1 billion to 35 billion in capacity, Ukraine had rendered traditional military paradigms obsolete, pioneering a new form of combat that heavily favored its innovative spirit. Their drones struck fear into the heart of Russian forces, delivering fatal blows where the giants once loomed largest. As they mobilized technology, the pinnacle came with Operation Spiderweb in June 2025, where Ukraine executed simultaneous strikes on Russian air bases, crippling a significant segment of their air arsenal. Every strike was a message: nowhere in Russia was safe from Ukrainian resolve. In this chess game of warfare, each pawn and knight held weight not just on the battlefield, but in the political corridors of power worldwide. Ukraine emerged not just as a defender, but as a formidable offender, reshaping the narrative of warfare and forcing Russia to confront the specter of its once assured dominance. The future remained uncertain, but one thing was clear: this was a battle not just for land, but for identity, sovereignty, and the very essence of nations. Would Ukraine continue to rise, or would the shadows of history pull them back into subjugation? The answers lay ahead, waiting to be written in the pages of time. Months after the Ukrainian forces bravely crossed into Russian territory, NATO's hesitance to provide deep strike capabilities began to shift dramatically. Until that point, fears of Russian nuclear threats loomed large. But the audacity of Ukraine's invasion, uncoordinated by outside forces, forced a re-evaluation of strategies. When Putin refrained from deploying his nuclear arsenal, a pivotal moment had arrived. In a remarkable turn of events, advanced military assets, including F-16s and Mirage 2000 jets, began arriving in Ukraine, enabling attacks further into Russian territory. For over 6 months, the battle over Kursk would see Ukrainian forces maintain control of parts of the territory well into June 2025. In a shocking move to strengthen their defenses, Russian commanders resorted to enlisting North Korean troops, a choice that proved disastrous, amplifying how the reality of their military power lagged behind their inflated statistics. Yet, perhaps the most pivotal change in this conflict has been Ukraine's transformation in drone warfare. Initially valued at about $1 billion in 2022, the domestic defense industry surged to an astounding $35 billion by 2025. With Ukraine now producing a significant portion of its weapons. In some areas, notably drones, this figure peaked at an incredible 100%. This astounding growth, born from a desperate need for survival, didn't just show brilliance, it showcased resilience. By early 2025, drones accounted for a staggering 70% of Russian battlefield casualties, with some estimates soaring to 80%. From small FPV drones that could take down tanks worth millions to long-range drones hitting targets deep within Russia, Ukraine was rewriting the rules of warfare. The climax came during Operation Spiderweb in June 2025, where Ukrainian forces simultaneously assaulted 5 Russian air bases. The results were nothing short of shocking: a third of Russia's strategic bomber fleet lay damaged or destroyed. These precision strikes signified a bold declaration: nowhere in Russia was safe from Ukrainian retaliation. With each successful operation, the confidence of Ukraine's forces swelled, leaving the Russian military grasping for a way to counter a rapidly evolving battlefield. How did a nation facing overwhelming odds manage to redefine its military capabilities? The answer lies in their relentless determination to adapt and innovate in the face of chaos. In June 2025, Ukraine unleashed a stunning operation called Spiderweb, targeting 5 Russian air bases in a coordinated strike. This audacious move crippled roughly 1/3 of Russia's strategic bomber fleet. The world was shocked: how could Ukraine reach deep into Russian territory? This boldness signaled a turning tide, revealing that no Russian stronghold was truly secure. These attacks showcased the prowess of Ukraine's modified FPV drones. Utilizing mobile networks, these drones provided live video feeds and manual control across vast distances. The key was their ability to blend control signals with civilian data traffic, making detection nearly impossible. Yet, this revolution in drone warfare was not solely the result of Western aid. While systems like the US Phoenix Ghost and the Switchblade 600 initially boosted Ukraine's capabilities, the real innovation came from a vast network of over 900 Ukrainian suppliers, from large manufacturers to small workshops. When one entity made a breakthrough, information rapidly spread throughout the network. This revolutionary approach enabled rapid prototyping and deployment. Traditional military supply chains took years. Ukraine turned around updates in months, adapting to battlefield needs almost in real time. However, these advancements were made possible because of vital Western support that allowed Ukraine to stay in the fight long enough to innovate effectively. When high-mobility artillery rocket systems, or HIMARS, arrived in June 2022, they introduced a game-changer. These systems could deliver guided warheads with an accuracy of around 10 feet, striking targets up to 50 miles away. Prior to their arrival, Ukrainian forces were hampered by older Soviet artillery that was slow to deploy and less effective. The U.S. delivered about 40 HIMARS launchers, and in record time, Ukrainian forces targeted over 350 Russian command posts and supply depots. Each successful strike wasn't just a victory, it disrupted Russian operations extensively, with the destruction of a single ammunition depot potentially neutralizing artillery fire across an entire sector for weeks. This illustrated not just a battle of weapons, but a gripping narrative of resilience, improvised genius, and the relentless spirit of a nation fighting against overwhelming odds. How much longer could Russia maintain its grip? Previously, Ukraine harnessed high-mobility artillery rocket systems to shatter Russian command posts and supply depots, creating cascading effects that silenced artillery barrages across entire fronts for weeks. Could Vladimir Putin's so-called unstoppable hypersonic missiles really be swatted from the sky like flies by Ukrainian defenses, exposing the cracks in Russia's high-tech facade? Imagine the deafening roar of explosions muffled by comb interceptors, the acrid scent of burning propellant lingering in the crisp autumn air over Kiev, a brutal reality check that shattered illusions of Russian invincibility. Now, when Putin unleashed his supposedly invincible Kinzhal hypersonic missiles, Ukrainian Patriot batteries countered with eerie precision. Do you feel the tension in the air, the ground trembling underfoot as missiles whiz by? In November 2024, a Patriot battery in Kiev intercepted a full salvo of those Russian hypersonic threats. Such a feat would have been unimaginable without foreign aid. Ukraine has received 7 Patriot batteries. Yet each PAC-3 MSI missile costs $4 million. Still, they've safeguarded Ukrainian cities and vital military hubs against destruction. But the real game-changer arrived with the first F-16s in August 2024, granting Ukraine a foothold in the skies against Russia. Initially, these jets seemed headed for obsolescence, outpaced by F-35 orders in Europe. Yet they carried modern defensive suites. Overhauled for compatibility with current weaponry, they bolstered Ukraine's aerial might. Ukrainian pilots mastered them swiftly. In one daring mission, a Ukrainian F-16 downed 6 Russian cruise missiles. Picture the adrenaline surge, the satisfying clatter of cannon fire puncturing targets mid-flight. By early 2025, French Mirage 2000D fighters reinforced the fleet, adding layers of resilience. Other breakthroughs included Bradley infantry vehicles and long-range missiles like the Javelin and Storm Shadow. Costly and challenging to wield flawlessly, they extended precious breathing room for Ukraine's homegrown strategies, flipping the war's momentum by 2023. What relentless truth stares Ukraine in the face, even amid these triumphs? Ukraine cannot triumph in pure attrition through manpower alone. Of course, a Ukrainian commander quipped that after 300 years of clashes with Russians, endurance runs deep. But survival demands more than grit. Amid the stench of gunpowder and the whisper of wind through ruined fields, a commander contemplates the unseen frontier. What obscure tactics, born of bitter necessity, will force Russia to bleed for every inch gained? As Ukraine faced off against Russia, victory appeared nearly impossible at first glance. Despite being a smaller nation, fraught with devastatingly imbalanced resources, Ukraine implemented strategies that proved not only effective but revolutionary against the backdrop of warfare. A Ukrainian commander aptly noted, "We've been at war with the Russians for 300 years, and we can endure a while longer." But survival depended not just on resilience, but strategic adaptation. Ukraine has taken systematic steps to reduce casualties while increasing the costs for Russian advances. This meant implementing more effective troop rotation to prevent fatigue, utilizing artillery with calculated precision to mitigate counter-battery fire, and employing drones for precise reconnaissance, allowing for quick, efficient troop maneuvers. Command posts were cleverly concealed in private residences, ensuring that if discovered, they could be evacuated swiftly. This strategic adaptation created a fascinating paradox: fewer troops were stationed right at the front lines, leaving Russian drones chasing after singular soldiers, which hardly justified their high cost. Ground drones, robotic wonders gliding on wheels, tracks, or even legs, became essential. They carried supplies and facilitated troop evacuations, often traveling over 10 miles without pause. Why? Because the skies above were ruled by FPV drones, rendering any visible human a target. Traditional vehicles left conspicuous trails, easily detectable by infrared sensors. In contrast, ground drones filled a vital niche, enabling communication and resupply without the risks associated with human movement. This synthesis of innovative drone warfare, meticulous tactical planning, and precision weapons supplied from the West reshaped the battlefield dynamics. Although Ukraine could not match Russia's massive waves of soldiers, it adopted tactics to make every Russian advance prohibitively costly. Data showed that by early 2025, Russian territorial gains had diminished significantly. Only 78 square miles were captured in March, a steep drop from 165 in January. The strategy was evidently working. As the war raged on, Ukraine's David story unfolded, showing how clever tactics and technology could tilt the balance in a fight that, at its onset, seemed all but lost. A shocking twist awaited as the world witnessed Ukraine not just defend but begin to reclaim its lands. What clever strategies would emerge next? And could the tide truly turn against the odds? The battlefield was set for yet another dramatic shift. On the battlefield of Ukraine, unexpected twists emerged as the conflict unfolded. What was meant to be a swift victory for Russia quickly turned into a prolonged struggle, forcing Vladimir Putin to reassess his grand strategy. Initially anticipating a quick victory in just 3 days, the Kremlin faced a harsh reality as Ukraine not only stood firm but began to turn the tide against a supposedly dominant military force. As we dive deeper into the situation, it becomes apparent that Ukraine's resilience was rooted in its intimate understanding of Russian tactics honed over decades of coexistence. The pivotal moment arrived during the battle for Hostomel Airport. Here, Russian troops, numbering between 200 and 300, launched an airborne assault with helicopters, seeking to capture a key location just outside the capital, Kyiv. This operation echoed the strategies employed in previous conflicts, reinforcing Russia's assumptions of a quick win. Yet, what awaited them was far from what they had envisioned. Instead of an unguarded airstrip, the Russians found themselves welcomed by a wall of defense, anti-aircraft systems ready to strike, makeshift obstructions on the runway, and a well-coordinated radar network that turned the tables before the first shot was even fired. The scene was set, the airspace buzzed with tension, punctuated by the sounds of chaos as the helicopters descended into a trap that would soon take a devastating toll on their forces. Despite managing to capture the airport, by the end of the day, the airstrip lay in ruins, marking the beginning of a prolonged siege that would unravel Russia's plans and ambitions. Fast forward to September 2022, and we see a clever ruse unfolding as Ukraine orchestrated a masterclass in strategic deception. Having established a formidable base in Izium, Russian forces were caught entirely off guard when Ukrainian troops surged into Kharkiv Oblast, taking advantage of Russia's misplaced focus. The astonishing rapidity of the Ukrainian advance left the enemy scrambling, an intricate dance of strategy that led to the reclamation of vast territories and the capture of valuable military assets. Reeling from early losses, Russia's military reputation began to fray. The quest for territorial gains became increasingly futile, revealing a shocking statistic: the need for Russian forces to conduct over 5 times more assaults to capture ground compared to previous months. With a staggering number of units rendered obsolete, their numerical advantage diminished to an embarrassing degree. As Ukrainian creativity surged, Russian forces faced not just loss of land, but a depletion of resources that threatened to grind their operations to a halt. Both the depletion of military assets and the economic toll of the conflict began to paint a grim picture for Russia. As early as March 2025, with just 78 square miles gained that month compared to 165 the previous January, the ongoing struggle seemed more like a desperate sprint than a march toward victory. Reports from intelligence agencies painted a dire image: Russia had lost over half of its military hardware. An unsustainable ravaging of resources that put the country's military ambitions in jeopardy. Amid this turmoil, Russia began tapping into its aging Soviet-era stockpiles, even resurrecting World War II-era tanks in training grounds, a clear sign of desperation rather than strength. Military analysts warned that without a significant increase in production capacity, Russia faced the imminent exhaustion of its reparable resources within a mere 12 to 18 months. What remained would prove inadequate to overpower Ukraine's will to fight back, leaving Putin's ambitions hanging by a thread. As we draw closer to the present, the strategic landscape has shifted dramatically. Ukraine, having developed an unprecedented domestic defense industry and embraced innovative tactics like drone warfare, now stands equipped with capabilities once thought unimaginable. The war, initially expected to be a brief engagement, has morphed into a complex battle of attrition, reshaping military landscapes forever. The looming question becomes clearer: how will Russia respond to the growing prowess of Ukraine as resources dwindle and its war machine falters? With multiple fronts of conflict, the strategic balance has altered, each move echoing through the corridors of power in both nations. The outcome remains uncertain, but one thing is evident: the resilience and ingenuity of Ukraine have rewritten the narrative of this conflict in profound ways. As Russia's oil and gas revenues, once fueling 30 to 50% of its government income, plunged by up to 35% year-over-year in May 2025. While defense costs devoured 40% of the federal budget, a strain unseen since Soviet times gripped the nation, mirroring Ukraine's own resilience under pressure. Imagine the bitter chill of a Moscow winter night, snow crunching under boots as families huddle by dim heaters, whispering about empty promises from the Kremlin. What if one leader's gamble shattered an empire's lifeblood? Could a single misstep drain a superpower dry? Putin faced the unthinkable. He announced cuts to military spending, nearly double digits for 2026. It was a quiet confession. Russia could no longer keep the relentless pace. Why this collapse? 3 crushing blows hit hard. First, Ukraine's precise drone operations targeted oil refineries. They crippled about 17% of Russia's refining power. Production of oil and gas tumbled too. Revenues followed suit, mirroring that sharp drop. Feel the acrid smoke rising from distant facilities, the ground trembling with each strike's echo. How does a giant falter when its fuel veins bleed out? Second, the European Union's smart price limits squeezed tight. Russian crude prices fell from $60 a barrel, down below 48. Ural crude crashed harder. From almost $70 to just 50 in 1 year. And the EU eyed total cutoff by 2027. Russia's top buyer vanished, like a door slamming shut in the dead of night. Third, desperate pivots to China and India came at a brutal price. China now haggled for discounts up to 40%, far below old European rates. Russia resorted to a hidden armada of vessels. Ships under false flags dodged sanctions. Costs for transport soared, profits withered like frostbitten crops. But the human cost cut deeper. Russia tallied over 1.1 million losses since the conflict ignited. Daily figures climbed steadily. From 300 at the outset, to more than 1,300 by March 2025. At this tempo, another 440,000 could mount each year. It would demand frantic retraining, worsening every economic wound. Replacement proved impossible. Enlistment plunged 80% from 2024 into early 2025. Prisons ran dry of recruits. Russia called in not 1, but 2 surges of North Korean support. A frantic plea, yet it barely touched the vast manpower void. The scars reached beyond the front lines. Flashback to a quiet Siberian village, the scent of pine and fresh bread in the air, a young father waving goodbye, his calloused hands gripping a worn suitcase. He never returned. Russia's forces in 2025 claimed 3% of the labor pool, up 40% from 2020. Vital men of working age vanished from jobs, often for good. Rhetoric echoes: how long can a nation bleed its future? Families fracture, economies stall. Yet Ukraine endures, turning the tide with ingenuity. What hidden strategy will tip the balance next? The Kremlin's shadows lengthen, but cracks widen. As we delve into the ongoing saga of the conflict that reshaped Europe, we witness a profound transformation in the balance of power. Russia's military stature, once formidable, is crumbling under a relentless onslaught. NATO is united in response to this aggression, and new members like Sweden and Finland bolster its ranks, effectively limiting Russia's access to the Baltic Sea. Meanwhile, Germany's commitment to ramp up military spending to 5% of its GDP by 2035 signifies a paradigm shift in defense strategy across Europe. In a shocking analysis, projections indicate that at the rate Russia was capturing territory in April 2025, nearly 68 square miles per month, it would take over 230 years to completely dominate Ukraine. At staggering casualty rates of up to 1,200 soldiers daily, this hypothetical conquest would require approximately 100 million Russian lives. To put this in perspective, that's nearly 70% of the entire Russian population. Clearly, a prolonged war of attrition is unsustainable for any nation. Observations suggest it will be Russia's military strength that falters before Ukraine's unyielding resolve. Despite the immense challenges, Ukraine has thrived, showcasing extraordinary resilience and tactical ingenuity. It's astonishing to note the limited resources provided by NATO, comprised mainly of outdated aircraft initially destined for retirement. While Ukraine lacks access to advanced stealth fighters like the F-22 or F-35, the situation remains grim for Russia. With Ukraine operating around 90 fighter jets compared to the U.S. Air Force's 1,600. It's a striking David versus Goliath scenario. The weaponry NATO supplied, although surplus, was quickly adapted by Ukraine's innovative engineers. The key lesson here is stark: decentralized innovation often triumphs over centralized command. Ukraine's vast network of suppliers allows for rapid weapon development and deployment, illustrating an agility that Russia's rigid military structure simply cannot match. Furthermore, the importance of information warfare cannot be understated. Deceptive tactics, like those leading up to the unexpected Kharkiv counteroffensive, proved crucial in securing pivotal victories. As the clock marches on, the stakes build exponentially. Can Ukraine maintain its momentum against a more traditionally powered adversary? Or will the fabric of expectation unravel as Ukraine continues to defy the odds? Let's uncover the startling developments that have begun to reshape the battlefield forever. Imagine for a second, if starting a war meant betting your empire's soul and losing it all in a gamble that backfired spectacularly. Can one nation's ingenuity really dismantle a superpower's pride, turning an invasion into a graveyard of ambition? That's the shocking reality Ukraine unveiled on Russia, with twists that humiliated a tyrant and reshaped global power. Phew! When Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, Vladimir Putin believed a decisive strike would topple Ukraine in days, re-establishing Russian dominance. Yet, over 3 years later, Ukraine hasn't just endured, it's dismantling Russia's supposedly unstoppable military, costing Moscow dearly in lives, land, and legacy. We've seen how Ukraine exploited Russian tactics at Hostomel Airport, the Kharkiv counteroffensive, the Kursk incursion, and a drone revolution that pierced Russia's defenses. But technology alone doesn't win wars. Amplifying skill is one thing, creating it another. Western arms provided lifelines, but Ukraine's triumphs emerged from masterful planning, elite training, and flawless execution. What really set them apart? Speed in the chaos of battle. Recall how Ukraine's drone network exploded in value and impact, outpacing Russia's sluggish adaptations. Now, fast decisions rule modern warfare. Observe, orient, decide, act, the faster side triumphs, no matter the tanks or guns. Ukraine stood firm not because of more artillery, but by crippling Russia's supply chains and command hubs. Hear the distant rumble of artillery echoing through ravaged fields, the acrid stench of gunpowder clinging to uniforms. The cold sweat on soldiers' palms as they outmaneuvered a behemoth. Was this survival, or the seed of transformation? Picture Ukraine clinging to hope in 2014 after Crimea fell, fighting desperately to avoid erasure. That phase ended. Ukraine evolved from a nation on the brink to a formidable force systematically unraveling a presumed superior foe. Each month of war erodes Russia's grip irreversibly. The taste of victory, metallic and bitter, like blood on victory medals, fuels their resolve. But what does this shift mean for the aggressor humiliated on the world stage? Russia clings to about 18% of Ukrainian territory, reduced to ghostly ruins where foundations crumble under the weight of endless bombardment. That small foothold drains over 1,000 Russian casualties daily, devouring irreplaceable resources and yielding zero strategic gains. Feel the chill wind carrying moans of the wounded, the earthy smell of unearthed trenches haunted by ghosts of ambition. Meanwhile, Ukraine surges stronger, domestic defense industries ballooning, tactics sharpening under fire's forge, warriors gaining combat-hardened expertise rivaling the world's best. Western support floods in with fewer strings, unshackling Ukraine's potential. Yet, the ultimate blow? How has Putin turned his grand design into ashes? Putin ignited this conflagration expecting to resurrect the Russian Empire in mere days. Instead, he's overseen the most crushing military disgrace since World War II. His special operation morphed into an existential crisis for Russia, not through Ukrainian armies conquering, but via the relentless erosion of military might, economic vitality, and global standing. The air thick with tension, the distant cry of jets like vultures circling disappointment, begs the question, when will the tally of humiliation catch up to this emperor without clothes? In a staggering turn of events, Ukraine has not only outmaneuvered Putin but has also forced him to bear the heavy consequences of his miscalculations. With each passing day, those costs pile up, leading to an unprecedented strain on Russia's military. The invasion that was intended to showcase Russian strength has instead exposed a glaring weakness, resulting in the most significant military setback for Russia since World War II. The echoes of artillery fire and the haunting sounds of military vehicles now tell the story of a battle that reshaped not only borders but the very fabric of global power dynamics. As Vladimir Putin envisioned a swift victory, an impassioned Ukrainian resistance blossomed into a force capable of dismantling the Kremlin's ambitions. How did a nation once on the brink of collapse rise to confront one of the most formidable militaries in the world? Let's delve back into this striking narrative, beginning with the seat of conflict. When Russian forces crossed into Ukraine on February 24, 2022, Putin believed he would secure a swift victory. He thought Ukraine's government would crumble in mere days, but rather than surrender, Ukraine has shown resilience. As months morphed into years, Ukraine's spirit remained unbroken, outsmarting Putin at nearly every juncture. On that fateful day, the invasion began, and the air was thick with tension. The Battle of Hostomel Airport was supposed to herald Russian victory, yet it became a bitter baptism for their forces. Helicopters, heralded as the vanguard of Putin's plans, spiraled into deadly terrain where Ukrainian forces were unexpectedly waiting. Rather than an unguarded airport, Russian soldiers faced a deadly barrage orchestrated with precision, their dreams of rapid conquest battered by tactical prowess. What lessons emerged as Ukrainian commanders outfoxed their adversaries? Amid an atmosphere heavy with determination, Ukrainian defenses repelled the initial invasion in a decisive act of defiance. As Russian helicopters flew directly into an ambush, the thunder of anti-air systems filled the air, turning the skies into a graveyard for the unprepared. Following this, a brewing storm of tactics was set to unfold. This strategic brilliance blossomed further with Ukraine's covert operations, turning the chaos of war into a landscape of opportunity. By exploiting Russian predictability, Ukraine initiated a counteroffensive at Kharkiv in September 2022 that left Russian forces reeling. How did they concoct such a masterstroke? With relentless precision, Ukrainian forces reclaimed over 1,000 square miles in just 6 days. The overwhelming speed of their advance rippled through the battlefields, filling the air with the palpable tension of a force that had awakened and was now unrestrained. But this decimation marked only the beginning. Ukraine's audacity would soon know. Picture the trap closing on Russia's hubris after a daring deception. Ukrainian troops surged into Kharkiv Oblast on September 6, blindsiding the invaders with lightning speed. Their daily advance of 4.6 miles shattered records, outpacing any offensive in over a century. Can Ukraine's ingenuity really turn the tide against a superpower, recapturing vast lands without mercy? In just 6 relentless days, they clawed back over 1,150 square miles of territory. The earth trembled under rushing boots, the acrid stench of gunpowder lingering as villages shattered. Dozens of settlements were freed, key strongholds like Izium and Kupiansk bursting with defiant cheers. Hundreds of Russian war machines fell silent, tanks exploded in fiery blooms, artillery forsaken in muddy pits. Recruited troops dropped gear hastily, fleeing before the relentless pursuit. Entire formations evaporated, a vanishing act unseen since World War II's darkest hours. As ammo dumps erupted in thunderous roars, Russian soldiers scattered northward, boots crunching through frostbitten fields. Back home, Moscow rang with oblivious revelry, party horns drowning out battlefield screams during the city's 875th anniversary. Completely out of touch, citizens clapped while the front crumbled. If Kharkiv showed Ukraine's defensive mastery, what shocking twist flipped the script in August 2024? The Kursk incursion dared the impossible, invading Russia itself. This reckless gamble pulled forces from defenses, seizing about 480 square miles of Kursk Oblast. More land than Russia grabbed all year. The stench of victory mingled with the metallic tang of spilled blood. Multiple layers of cunning destroyed illusions. Russian soil, once untouchable, now pierced by Ukrainian wrath. It yanked 50,000 troops from other lines, delaying offensives by weeks or months. Most crucial, it shattered Western doubts, fueling advanced weapons flow. NATO hesitated before, fearing nuclear doomsday from strikes on Russian depths. But Ukraine's own border thrust proved Putin's threats empty. He unleashed no bombs. Suddenly, calculations flipped. F-16s roared in, Mirages and missiles targeted Russian hearts without hesitation. The fight raged over 6 months, pockets still held by June 2025. Russia sunk low, calling North Korean troops clumsy fools, exposing Russia's hollow might. What humiliates a giant more than incompetent aid? Battlefields now echo with drone swarms, no corner safe from buzzing doom. But will Ukraine's homegrown tech deliver the final humiliation? Amidst the chaos of war, a striking reality emerges: the impact of conflict extends far beyond the battlefield. By 2025, Russia's military is reduced to a mere fraction of its workforce, constituting only 3% of the nation's labor pool, a staggering 40% increase from 2020. This alarming statistic reveals a grim picture: working-age men are being systematically siphoned from the workforce, often never to return. The situation is compounded by a catastrophic fertility crisis that has left Russia bereft of a generation that should be joining the labor force and building families. In a single year, 2022, the number of potential workers aged 16 to 35 plummeted by 1.33 million. The military-industrial complex faces its own challenges, grappling with a shortfall of up to 120,000 engineers and estimated total manpower shortages of around 400,000. Once a robust source of revenue and geopolitical clout, military exports have contracted dramatically by an appalling 92% from 2021 to 2024. This decline is exacerbated by Western sanctions that prevent Russia from insulating its economy and acquiring vital imports for advanced military systems. The startling truth for Russia is that their once promising arsenal, touted as top-tier technology, has failed to penetrate the defenses of a nation with a fraction of the budget, troops, and hardware. In this light, the confidence of potential buyers in Russia's military wares is eroding rapidly. The diplomatic landscape has shifted, relationships with remaining allies have turned increasingly exploitative. China demands steep discounts on Russian energy, leveraging Russia's situation as a stark warning against defying Western economic influence. North Korea provides subpar ammunition and conscripts for Russia's relentless tactics, while Iran, profiting from the chaos, charges exorbitant prices for drones, all the while watching Russia's military reputation crumble. NATO, invigorated by the specter of Russian aggression, has fortified its ranks, with Sweden and Finland joining forces, further isolating Russia from the Baltic region. Germany commits to a military spending increase to 5% of its GDP by 2035, marking a significant shift in Europe's defense strategy. The narrative has shifted, confidence is waning in Russia, and a sobering reality dawns about the future of its military ambitions. As the echoes of a reckless military invasion rang across the land, Ukraine stood at a precipice, teetering yet defiant. In the early dawn of February 24, 2022, Russian forces surged into Ukraine, backed by the confident assertions of President Vladimir Putin. He envisioned a swift conquest, a mere flicker of resistance before a complete takeover, maybe 3 days, perhaps a week. Yet, unbeknownst to him, a storm was brewing, ready to wade through the chaos. Russia's initial attack was drawn from a playbook of historical conquests, strategies honed in the ashes of past conflicts, Czechoslovakia, Afghanistan, Crimea. But this time, stubborn reality thwarted triumph. The intended easy capture of Hostomel Airport turned into a deadly trap. Ukrainian defenses lay waiting. As helicopter rotors whirred, Russian pilots unknowingly entered a zone of destruction, beset by man-portable air defense systems and anti-aircraft guns. The airport was not an easy launchpad, it was a graveyard for Russian ambitions. Despite a brief capture, the airstrip lay in ruins, the promised airlift crumbled. Within 5 weeks, Putin's grand campaign unspooled, unraveling into a debilitating siege as Ukrainian resilience blazed in dark skies. This moment marked the beginning of a relentless saga, one where every miscalculation by the Russian military played right into Ukrainian hands. The summer of 2022 saw Russia take the strategic city of Izium, a trove of logistics with 18,000 troops entrenched. Yet, as illusions of invincible authority swirled, Ukrainian General Alexander Syrsky orchestrated a plan cloaked in deception, huddled behind curtains of misinformation. Both media and military eyes focused on an impending counteroffensive in the southern region of Kherson. On August 29, Ukraine announced its long-awaited operation, compelling Russia to scramble its best forces south. But this was a diversion, a calculated ruse. With astonishing precision, on September 6, Ukrainian forces struck in the Kharkiv Oblast, catching the Russian military off guard. The swift advance, with troops covering an average of 4.6 miles a day, marked one of the most rapid offensives in over a century. Imagine the sounds of boots thundering on the ground, and the cries of urgency intertwining with the rustling winds of change. Towns, long lost to foreign occupations, tasted liberation again as over 1,150 square miles were reclaimed in mere days. Russian units abandoned their heavy machinery and valuable equipment in chaotic retreat, an unthinkable phenomenon for an army that carried the weight of bygone victories on its back, marking history with the first disappearance of entire formations since the last Great War. As the dust settled, the battlefield transformed, yet the stakes continued to rise. Could Ukraine maintain this relentless spirit? Would the tides turn in unforeseen ways? Each chapter building upon the last, the tale of resilience against overwhelming odds unfolded, capturing the hearts and minds of all who bore witness. Stay tuned. For the next part of this gripping saga reveals Ukraine's audacious ventures into the depths of enemy territory and the perilous path of innovation that would alter the course of warfare forever. The stunning counteroffensive in Kharkiv caught the Russian forces off guard, paving the way for a historic military movement. By September 6, after weeks of calculated deception, Ukrainian troops sprang into action, moving an impressive average of 4.6 miles per day. This was an unprecedented speed in modern warfare, marking the onset of a new chapter as the Ukrainian spirit lit the battlefield with hope and determination. Within just 6 days, Ukraine reclaimed over 1,150 square miles of territory, liberating dozens of towns, including the critical strongholds of Izium and Kupiansk. The once mighty Russian military, armed with an arsenal of heavy equipment, found itself in chaos, abandoning tanks, artillery, and logistics hubs as they retreated. It was a sight to behold Russian units dispersed and lost, the first time in generations that entire formations had simply vanished in such a catastrophic way. This was more than a tactical failure, it was a monumental blow to Russian pride. As the soldiers fled from their posts in northeast Ukraine, the people of Moscow were preoccupied with festivities celebrating the city's 875th anniversary. Blissfully unaware, they danced while the landscape of their military ambitions crumbled into ruins. Could they truly be so out of touch with reality? But just when the world thought they knew Ukraine's strategy, August 2024 entered the scene with an audacious twist. Ukraine didn't just defend its territory, it launched an unprecedented invasion into Russia itself. Taking a desperate gamble, Ukrainian forces crossed the border, capturing approximately 480 square miles of Russian land in Kursk Oblast. This wasn't just bold, it was downright reckless, yet its brilliance could not be denied. Suddenly, the myth of Russian invulnerability began to unravel. This incursion forced Russia to divert around 50,000 troops from their other fronts, disrupting their plans for months. Perhaps the most critical consequence of this strike was the transformation it catalyzed within the West. Until then, NATO had hesitated to provide Ukraine advanced long-range weaponry, fearing a reaction from Moscow. But when Russia didn't retaliate with nuclear force, a new sense of urgency arose. How would this shift in dynamics alter the course of the war? The foundations for unprecedented support were being laid, but the stakes continued to escalate.
And as the tension mounted, one question loomed larger than ever: would Ukraine's next move turn the tide forever?
Imagine this: a nation once boasting endless might now bleeds from wounds that run deeper than any trench.
As Ukraine's ingenuity shreds Russia's front lines with drones and daring strikes, the hidden toll mounts. What if the real battle isn't for land, but for a people's very future?
That's the shocking twist. Russia's war machine devours its own soul, leaving a hollow empire on the brink. From the thunder of distant explosions to the eerie silence of empty factories, feel the chill of a country unraveling. Building on how Western aid and Ukrainian innovation turned the tide, think those Patriot systems calmly swatting down hypersonic threats like flies, or F-16s slicing through the skies for the first time in August 2024. The real devastation hits home. Russia's manpower crunch, already a gaping hole from endless recruitment drives that snag just a fraction of what's needed, now ripples into every corner of life. Picture the fog of despair settling over Russian cities, where the air carries the metallic tang of rusting machinery left idle. By 2025, the military swallows a shocking 3% of the nation's labor force. That's a 40% jump from 2020 levels. Working-age men vanish from jobs, workshops, and homes, pulled into uniform, often lost forever to the grind of the front.
How does a society rebuild when its builders are gone? Rhetorical thunder rolls: can Russia afford this endless drain?
Yet the crisis deepens, like a storm cloud bursting.
A fertility plunge leaves the country starved of youth. In 2022 alone, potential workers aged 16 to 35 dropped by 1.33 million. Families shrink. Dreams fade amid the sterile echo of unanswered calls from the draft office.
The military-industrial heart, once pumping with pride, stutters. Shortages cripple it, up to 120,000 engineers missing, total manpower voids hitting 400,000.
Factories hum with half-crews, the acrid smoke of incomplete projects stinging the air. Exports, that golden vein of power and cash?
They've withered by a brutal 92% from 2021 to 2024. Western sanctions bite like iron jaws, blocking parts for cutting-edge gear.
No escape, no buffer. Russia's vaunted arsenal, hyped as unbeatable, bounces off Ukraine's scrappy defenses despite Kyiv's slimmer budget, fewer troops, less hardware. Buyers worldwide scoff now. Why trust gear that crumbles against an underdog's grit? Twist here: the Kremlin's allies circle like vultures, not saviors.
China haggles for energy at rock-bottom prices, a humiliating reminder: defy the West, and pay dearly. North Korea ships dud ammo and reluctant fighters, their boots slogging through mud they barely understand.
Iran?
They hawk drones at gouging rates, grinning as Russia's rep tanks.
Smell the betrayal in every lopsided deal, hear the hollow cheers of forced partnerships.
NATO, meanwhile, swells with resolve, the specter of aggression forging steel.
Sweden and Finland bolt the door on the Baltic, walls rising swift and sure.
Germany pledges a massive leap, military spending to 5% of GDP by 2035.
Europe's shield hardens, Russia's shadow shrinking in the glare. Confidence evaporates like morning mist under a scorching sun. What happens when the bear's roar turns to a whimper?
The future of those grand ambitions, it hangs by a fraying thread, as Ukraine's unyielding spirit exposes the fragility within.